Okay, we're going to start here. Welcome to our workshop. We have two items in our workshop today, and we have the honor of having House Representative Orwall. That's twice you did that to me today. Okay, welcome to our workshop here. We got two items on our agenda for today. We have the honor of having House Representative Orwall here, and she's going to talk about a presentation on human trafficking. So, Representative Orwall is all yours, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, Mayor, council members, neighbors watching this. I first want to say thank you. I've been working on this very difficult issue for many years, and Kent has always been a partner. In fact, you've led so many of the efforts I'm going to talk about today. And just to acknowledge, it's a very difficult topic to talk about. And it is very local. I remember when I started working on it, probably 2009, and I was doing ride-alongs, and there was one evening where there was a 14 and 15-year-old being trafficked that went to the same high school as my children. And the area where the perpetrator was probably within 4 or 5 blocks of where I lived. So these things hit very close to home for all of us. And so I just want to say thank you for putting a spotlight on it. I was going to spend a little bit of time talking about the topic in general, talking about what's happened during the pandemic, and then talking about legislation at the state level, and then maybe opportunities to really partner with you on more work in this area so we really can keep supporting survivors of trafficking and really address this issue. So what is human trafficking? And I know all of you are familiar with this topic, but I think it's always good to look at the definitions. And, what jumps out to me at this United Nations is really that force, abduction, fraud, or coercion. And, there's a lot of ways to really, we often see the handcuffs and people's hands tied up, but there's so many ways to force people to do really horrible things. And, I work with Jerry Mamu, who is a survivor, and she's over one of the agencies, and she was abducted from her tribe at the age of 13. Mm-hmm. And she was taken in our state, Oregon. So what happens to a lot of these young folks is that they're taken out of their community, right? They're taken to places they don't know. They're told they're damaged. They're told their community won't want them back. So, again, I just think, reminding that there's a lot of ways to coerce and harm people, and that's why this topic is so complex. So some of the studies and some of the things we're hearing, this was in a presentation done by Deborah Boyer, who's one of our state experts, was that child luring has increased 99% in 2020. And so, picture we're in a pandemic. Picture all these young adults who aren't able to go to school. They're at their home. They're removed from their peers. They're lonely. They're depressed. And they're spending a lot of time online. Mm-hmm. And, sadly, it's concerning. And so that's why I think this conversation is so timely, because I think the impact's probably so much larger than we might realize it right now. The over 2,000 buyers in 24 hours trying to buy sex from a minor, that was from King County. Again, King County is going to lead the state in efforts around focusing on demand. And I went to some of those stings, and I went to the ones in Kent. And just the professionalism and the work that is done by our police force was just phenomenal. But it really struck me, as soon as an ad went up, it just lit up. The calls were just nonstop, and the people that they arrested in these stings were from all walks of life. You wouldn't necessarily know who would respond, and it's very sad. The other thing we've heard a lot about recently, because we think about kids and social media, is a lot of kids are on TikTok. Mm-hmm. Well, perpetrators know that, right? And so now there's all these parts of TikTok where all these videos are loaded up. And again, as government, it's hard to keep up with the technology and what's going on. But again, I always remember how fearful I was when my kids were younger around phones and computers, and I think it's probably even more so now. And think of all those kids that spend all that time on TikTok. It's like anything you can get into their stream. So again, it's a very complex time, and so I'm really glad that you are looking at this. Runaways. You know, there's often, when you look at youth that are trafficked, there's a couple things we see. Obviously, runaways are targeted very, very quickly on the streets. Other studies we've had have shown about 50% of the youth trafficked are foster youth. There are kids that have left a placement. It's very, for those that are trafficked, we know there's a very strong history of sexual abuse. We also know that many of the trafficking victims are youth of color, especially Black. We also know from King County and all the stings they've done that 71% of the buyers are Caucasian. So, and that graph on the bottom that it talks youth at risk, and I'm kind of focusing on the child trafficking. That bottom line of human trafficking is labor trafficking, and you can see that kind of crosses all kind of age range. And if you look at that peak, the second graph that has the peak is youth, right? Children and youth and sex trafficking. And so that peak, it used to be that the median age was like 15, and now it's like 13 and 14. So we're seeing the age go down. And again, if you look at sexual assault, if you look at trafficking, it really is that 14 to 25 age group where a lot of the harm happens that are targeted. And this is young women, this is young men, this is transgender youth. I mean, it's really that age block that is so high at risk. And again, those running away that don't have supports are even more at risk. I'm going to talk a little bit about the legislature. First, the ad on the right, that was a huge, the You Are Not Alone campaign that was started by BEST. I don't know if you're familiar with BEST. They do a lot of the training on human trafficking in our hotels, or hotel industry. And they worked with King County, the state, the ports, the airlines to do this You Are Not Alone campaign. But everything that was written and all the ads were done by survivors, which I think is really important. And we use the terms trafficking, but what does that mean to the average person? And so what I love about the ads, one is you're not alone, we're here to support you, but it kind of spells out, is someone making you have sex for money or shelter? I mean, often people don't know what trafficking means, and it's that remembrance that we need to talk about, are you being harmed? Is someone making you do something you don't want? So again, I think this is a great example of a campaign. So in the Washington legislature, they started in 2000, 2003, acknowledging that there was human trafficking, and that was labor trafficking, that was sex trafficking. Velma Valoria, who I didn't get to serve with, she was one of the founders of all this work, along with Junico Wells and Karen Fraser. And so our state started to be one of the first in the nation to acknowledge it. Then later, there really was a strong focus on legislation around crimes, protections, awareness, and services. And then what you'll see in 2012 and 2018 is there's a whole lot more activity. And, there should be a very long list of legislators, and I will mention a few names. But, some of the things we did that probably impacted Kent is when we started looking at the fines and penalties to those that are exploiting, we said, the state's been collecting all this money, but it would make a lot more sense for it to come back to the cities. And so we had the money come back, and then half of that could be for law enforcement to do stings and other things around trafficking. And the other half was for survivors. And of course, many of us, Kent was one of the leaders in all this work in really doing the stings. And I know a lot of us know Kira, and she was awesome at Kent Youth and Family. And so, again, we realized at the state we had this aha moment, like, how do we get resources to you? You're doing this work. You're setting up the services. So there was a shift in that time period. Later, I think, and the other thing I would say, it's very bipartisan. I've been sharing the last several years this kind of, I have a group, and I think it's kind of equal, Republicans and Democrats, and there's so much work being done in this area, and it's really, again, very bipartisan. So the next big thing, I think, is that we realized we needed to do more to support survivors. And Senator Dingra's name should be up there. But in 2019 through 2021, there was a huge planning process with law enforcement, with our agencies, with survivors. It was actually in Burien, most of the meetings, talking about what can we do better. And there's a thing called safe harbor. And safe harbor is when you embrace survivors and you make sure, again, you're providing the services and supports, not treating them, not arresting them, not having them feel like they did something wrong, but focusing on the perpetrators. And so one of the things we passed, took us several years, was the Safe Harbors Bill. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But again, that is to make sure we're not doing further harm or traumatizing those who are survivors of trafficking. So I'm going to talk about this bill. So there's a couple items on it I want to highlight for you. One is that there's 2 regional Department of Child, Youth, and Family Service staff that are the liaison for all of these activities. And one of them is Judy Johnston, and she is your region. So I wanted to make sure you knew about her, because if there's any planning groups, if there's any activities that you want to have the Department of Child, Youth, and Family more involved in, that you think pertains to this, this is your contact person. So she was hired as a result of this bill. There's 2, one for the receiving center and all the activities in Eastern Washington, and one for Western Washington. But these positions are supposed to also interface with law enforcement. The other thing we found on the bill, and I don't think I have a slide for it, is law enforcement had some concerns about what tools would they have to go after the perpetrators, especially as we kind of decriminalized. And so there's a separate group that's been meeting regularly. Judge Mack has been helping to chair that. There's a lot of law enforcement, FBI, looking at the tools we need to make sure law enforcement has so that they feel like they can do it. A big part of what they looked at was the cell phones and how do you get the information off the cell phones. And so, you know, I just want to assure you that there's people that understand this much more than I do that are coming back to us with recommendations of how we're going to address that. But that's yet to be seen.
Representative Orwall, Councilmember Thomas, I have a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tina, am I right? You are the primary sponsor of 1775?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Again, it was a big team effort. And one of the sad things for me is, so there's supposed to be 2 receiving centers. And I'll tell you about the one in Spokane. The other one was supposed to be in Burien. And unfortunately, during that time that it took to pass, the executive director changed at Navos. And so they no longer were going to be that site, because that was going to be the second site, at least that they were going to, do an RFP to the state to be one. And so the good news is we have one receiving center now, and it's at Daybreak Youth Services. Is anyone familiar with Daybreak? Mm-mm. Are you? They're a chemical dependency treatment facility, and they work a lot with youth with trauma histories. And they were already in some ways working with youth that had been trafficked, but they hadn't really created any specialized services or a unit. So they applied right away. One of the things I love about Spokane and these agencies is they partner really well. And so this isn't just a receiving center. They have partnered with Catholic Community Services for beds after people leave. We started with a 72-hour, and then we really realized it needs to be 30 days. You need more time to build rapport and connect people to services. And so a bunch of us went down during the last interim, and we visited it, and we were really impressed. Their dedication, getting it up and running during a pandemic, not easy. So that is up and running. But we still, despite having the money sitting there, we have not had an agency in Western Washington step up. We are looking at the licensure and the rates and all of those things. I know we got some additional dollars for Daybreak, and it certainly is available. They'll be doing another RFP. Daybreak has expressed interest. They have some facilities in Vancouver, but they have expressed an interest to come to King County. So they are also looking at options in that front. So the wonderful, wonderful Kent. When I thought about Spokane, I also thought about Kent, because you guys are so good at partnerships. right? You know your providers, you meet with them, partnerships, and I think to tackle any of this issue is going to take tremendous partnerships. One of the things that I learned early about our city is that we have a very high rate of children that have contact with the Department of Child and Youth Services, and a really high number of them leave the Kent area. So I know there's been a focus with Mockingbird to try to keep more kids in Kent, keep our kids in Kent. And we also, you were the leader in bringing back local funding when we started moving the funding with the stings and the outreach. So I don't know what the opportunities are for receiving centers, but I think wherever that goes, and whether it ends up in South King County, they're going to need all the pieces, right? It's not only going to be a receiving center, but they're going to need the case management, they're going to need the job training. You know, it's going to, these survivors are going to need a package of things to rebuild their lives. The other thing, and I know I've talked to some of you about, is 988, and that's the 3-digit behavioral health number that starts July 16th nationwide. And, you know, I've been working with Senator Dingaro around our state preparing for that. And the other conversation that's happening is we have a lot of youth experience behavioral health crisis right now. It's staggering. And we want to make sure we're, you know, creating a safe space in the community for youth that are struggling. And the thing I would say is I've kind of, in my mind, said you got 988, you have trafficking, but yet when you look at survivors of trafficking, they have very complex trauma. And a lot of them have addiction issues. So, you know, I don't know, I don't think we can have too many resources for youth, but I think that the timing of all these conversations is important because we need services for our youth. And so that's kind of for, you know, just trying to say what the landscape looks like. I think there's a lot of opportunities. I was feeling kind of sad when I did this PowerPoint, but to me, there is hope, right? There's hope. One, so many of the people I work with on legislation are survivors, and they're resilient, and they're doing such incredible things to give back to our community. So it's one of the things that Jerry, who I mentioned, was taken from her tribe when she was 13. She just said, why didn't no one help me? You know, why did no one help me out of this? You know, it's like, so I want to make sure we're not missing any opportunity to help a youth out of this situation. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to make a quick comment. You know, there's a lot of things that goes on in Olympia, right? A lot of bills get passed in Olympia. When I think of human trafficking, I think of you. Because I think, you know, you have been out, you may not have been the creator, but you've definitely been able to keep it sustaining and keep it going. And this is such a thing. I think about our kids, and you talk about how they get younger. It's so important. And I deeply appreciate your leadership in this here. And I know we in the city really want to do all we can to try to make sure we support it and be part of it. But I just want to say thank you for your leadership. And it means the world to me because our kids are our future. And I just think about just how can people treat kids like that. It just totally baffles me. And you're right, it could be anybody, anywhere in our community. You just don't know. And I think we all need to try to own this here. So thanks again for your leadership. And I think, Madam Mayor, has some comments.
Thank you, Council President. So Representative Orwall, first, thank you. I have had the pleasure of seeing you in action. I think we were on at that same hotel that night when people were funneling through there, and it's heartbreaking how quickly there's response to ads. And you're absolutely right. I remember talking to an 18-year-old young man whose buddies dared him to respond to the ad, and the mom and me wanted to do nothing but hug him. And then a 50-year-old guy who knew way better, and a 75-year-old man, right? And everything in between. So it impacts. And our kids that are being trafficked are our neighbors, our kids, right? The work that you have done to bring that funding source and the money coming to cities, and you know this, that the money that we were able to use to partner with Kent Youth and Family Services to hire the advocate, we have there are hundreds of survivors because of that money, and that would not have happened had the city not had the resource to be able to look at a community agency like Kent Youth and Family Services and create that very unique partnership. So thank you for that. I think I can speak for we're here, we are committed, and we want to be a part of this work. You and I have talked about the 988 centers, and I hadn't thought about a trafficking piece to that, but I do think it presents a very unique opportunity to provide all of those kinds of services in one place. So let's keep the conversation going.
Excellent, and thank you. And I just want you to know, again, that you're leading the state in this work. You really embraced it, and just, again, it's my honor to work with you on this.
And getting people to realize that people that are trafficked are victims, right? That's a position that we took a long time ago, and I am seeing it around the state. But they're the victims in this, and it is the supply side or the demand side that we really need to be focused on. So thank you for all of your work.
And real quick, I just want to say thanks to Councilmember Fincher because she brought this subject matter forward. Say, hey, we need to talk about this here, so we're able to get it on the agenda. So I want to thank you as well, Councilmember Fincher, for bringing it forward. So thank you. Any question for the representative while we have it here? Okay. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks again.
Appreciate it. And don't feel like you need to stay, okay? Okay, we're going to move on to our next item, sound transit presentation on the transit-oriented development, and Mr. Bill Ellis is going to kick this off for us.
Yes, thanks, Council President. Good evening, Council members and Mayor Ralph. I'm here joined today. We're hosting the Sound Transit-Oriented Development team. Tim Bates, the Senior Development Director, and Katie Druhl, our Government Affairs Officer from Sound Transit, the Federal Way Link Extension, are here to present on work completed to date. It's been a few months. Several months really since last heard a presentation. They're going to talk a little bit about the outreach to date and some of the analysis of the site. So with no further ado, I will introduce Katie Druhl to kick it off.
The System Expansion Committee said yes, it goes before the full.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to keep my mask on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I think before we dive into the meat of the TOD presentation, just for the viewing public, I suppose, since you all know all this information already, I'm going to give a level set on the project and the site. And actually, the first thing I'm going to do is introduce Mara D'Angelo, who's on the screen over there. She's the TOD manager. So Tim is the project manager, and then Mara can speak if there are any programmatic questions that do come up about the broader TOD program. And here we go. Federal Way Link Extension, we're really excited to be coming deeper into South King County to be opening 2 stations in the city of Kent in 2024. The project is about 8 miles, adding 3 new stations, Kent Des Moines, Star Lake, and the Federal Way Transit Center. And just as a reminder, it's a 12-minute travel time. So folks getting on in Federal Way will be on the West Hill in 12 minutes. Somebody leaving downtown Seattle is going to be at the Kent Des Moines station in 42 minutes. So this is a really big deal, and we're really excited to be joining this part of the community. And then zooming in, station area. So again, I know you all have seen this before, but as a reminder, we're going to be building 3 new streets. The station will straddle a new 236th, which will connect both to the parking garage on the east, and then over to Highline College on the west. There will be public plaza, parking, landscaping. That parking garage is the blue rectangle. And then the thing that we're here for today is, of course, to talk about the future TOD site. And those 2 sites, it's about 4 acres, are outlined in pink, which you can sort of see. The big gray boxes are the future TOD sites. So once we're done with construction staging, they will be redeveloped, and Tim will come up and talk a little bit more about that with you. And just one more from me. This is a view from a couple of months ago, some drone footage looking south toward the site. So that's, of course, the alignment in the middle, the parking garage, which is nearly complete, to the left where the crane is, and then the two sites, again, outlined in pink. And then you can see over to the other side is the Highline campus and the campus view apartments, and then, of course, the sound. So we're pretty excited about the progress that the project is making, but then also really excited to talk about the future, what comes after the light rail is there. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tim.
All right. Well, good evening, Mayor and council members. I've met some of you before, I think, and you may or may not remember. A few years ago, I was up here. So although you may know, I've recently stepped into the role of leading this project, but I've been on the project for quite some time. So it's good to see some of you again. And as you know, we've been working with the city for a couple of years now on these sites. And I'm going to give a little update on that, and we'll talk about the community engagement work that we've relatively recently completed, and talk a little bit about what's next. So, as you know, we've been working really from the beginning on this idea of these sites becoming new mixed-use, mixed-income part of the community, and really helping to realize part of that Midway vision. And we're excited about it, and we've been excited to work with staff on, getting closer and closer to that. Katie mentioned, we have a little over 4 acres of land here. So between that, the projects, that we're able to build on that, the new light rail station, all of that is really a major investment in the transformation of the area. And so we're excited to see how that can really contribute to, the new part there up on the West Hill. So with that, I think what I'll do quickly, if I can advance the slides, there we go. Quickly just remind you, I think you might have seen a slide similar to this in the past. Just give you a quick overview of our TOD process, and then we'll talk about the engagement work we've done. So as you may recall, Sound Transit does not build the transit-oriented development that we end up having on our land. So we're first and foremost a transit agency. So when we do have land that no longer has a transit purpose, we can then go and look to find other uses for that land. And often, especially when we're near a station, that becomes transit-oriented development. And what we typically do is actually go out to the market to try to find a developer who will meet the goals and criteria that we've set, and then they can go forward and build that new project. So we started this off in 2020, and we spent the last couple of years working through these 3 big phases here you can see on the slide. And we've just wrapped up the second phase here, the site program, where we work to understand what can be done on the site and go out and talk to the community. And now we're really just kicking off into this third phase where we're taking that feedback we've heard and trying to wrap all the pieces up and get ready to go out and find a development partner. So still some time to come for that, but that's where we're headed. And because we've just wrapped up the community engagement, we wanted to take some time to let you know what we had heard. So with that, I will dive in. So we'll talk a little bit about what we did and all of the engagement efforts, and then what we heard. And really to start, we had a couple of key goals for the engagement work, right? So part of it is to build awareness for what the project is, what are we talking about here? And then part of it is to gather input from the community on, what they might like to see happen with these parcels, but what kind of activities and uses would they like to see there? And of course, as we do this, we want to make sure that we're reaching out to a broad cross-section of the community and make sure we're getting a diverse audience who are responding to that and being able to participate. So in doing that, we had really, again, 3 phases. We had 3 phases of this work. We started off doing what we call early engagement. So we go out and talk to community organizations and local and regional agencies, trying to get a sense of, partly to build awareness on their part of what the project is, and also to try to understand, are there some initial ideas there that we could use to seed our engagement work with the broader community? Are there potential areas for partnership, or trying to get out there and to start on the ground and talk to people. And you can see there we've got a quick list of some of the types of organizations we went out and talked to. And we did that, of course, in conjunction with staff here at the city. That early engagement work and those conversations did continue into the second and third phase, but we started out first with that, try to just to get the ball rolling. We then moved into phase one, which was really that broader engagement work. We went out and talked to the community, really through the format of an online survey. Unfortunately, this whole engagement effort did take place during the pandemic, so we didn't get to do any of those in-person meetings like we normally would try to do. But we were able to get get the word out and get some decent response here to the engagement activities that we were able to offer. So that first phase again was this online survey, and really that was starting at a pretty high level to say, what would you like to see here? What are your ideas for this? We took that feedback that we heard, we went back and did some more work, and then we went back to the community a second time in phase two to say, here, we put together a more robust sort of online open house format and say, here's what we heard from you in the first round. Here's some new ideas. Let's refine. We want to understand and refine what we're hearing from you to make sure that we really got it dialed. And in doing all of this, you can see here some of the stats on how we got the word out. We sent thousands of postcards, and we sent emails to our stakeholder groups and community organizations. And we also, of course, did online advertisements and advertisements in local media and that sort of thing as well. And did the same sort of tactics for the second phase as well, with a little bit broader reach, trying to find an even broader audience for that second engagement. And all of the materials were available in 6 languages. We're really trying to make sure that we can, have that available for folks in language. So that's the summary of what we did. And I know that's a lot of information, but just to say that we really tried to get out there and give a couple of opportunities for folks to weigh in. So now we can get to the findings. What did we actually hear from folks? So I'll just say, this is a list of the top themes that we heard. We do have a complete report on our website that documents all the findings, all the things we heard from folks in each of those 3 phases of the engagement work. But here we'll just talk about the key themes that we heard. And of course, if you have questions, we can try to answer those, and we can make sure you have a link to that report too. So just right off the bat, I think one of the key things we did here was a strong interest in housing opportunities, and in particular, affordable housing here. We certainly heard that development on these sites that's family friendly was a key interest, and there was certainly a note that folks wanted to see that the affordable housing in particular served families, and the issue of being able to meet the needs of multi-generational families did come up in the engagement work. In addition to just housing, folks also want to see other types of things happen, right? And that kind of goes to that thinking about this as a new urban node up there. The idea that you have those active uses on the ground floor that help make the area more vibrant and more convenient for everyone. So we know that folks were interested in, as it says, small-scale retail and commercial. So the idea that the uses that could come into those places could support small and emerging businesses by making spaces that would be appropriate for them. We also know that folks were interested in community gathering spaces, food retail, childcare, sort of a nice mix of the types of services and uses that people would like to see in that kind of urban environment. We also saw that folks really wanted to see that this project reflects the local community. And I think we might say that the project seems like it is of the place and of the community. That's partly in meeting the needs of the community and partly in reflecting the diversity of the community. So the idea, in fact, of partnership with the community, partnership with organizations in the community as part of delivering the project came up in the course of the engagement work. And then finally, we certainly heard about ideas on how the site, more particulars, the kind of the architectural or the how the things get laid out and that sort of thing. And I think what I would characterize it to say, folks want to see an interesting, active, urban environment that feels like it's that new, fun place to be. That's walkable and safe and has a variety of different things happening there. And you can see that in some of these items here, like having spaces that are active, but also spaces that are quieter. A design that does promote public safety with things like good lighting and good visibility and things like that. And of course, because this is a transit-oriented development project, it was great to see that folks were really interested in bicycle and pedestrian connections, and really that the sites are developed to be pedestrian-oriented. So that's, I know, for the course of 2 years, this is a really boiled down summary, but I think it does cover a lot of different ideas from what the community was able to weigh in on. So we were happy to see a lot of interesting themes, and I think that this feedback really reflects that idea that as we started out this process with staff, that this be a mixed-use, mixed-income project, and I think the community feedback really underscored that. So, with that, I want to move on and talk a little bit about what's next. So, we have quite a bit of work to do over the coming months this year. In the next 6 to 9 months, we have quite a bit of work. And we're doing that, of course, still in partnership with staff here at the city. And, as we've kicked off into this new year, we've been working to say, well, what does this all mean for us? How do we translate this into goals for the project? And what does that mean for how we, like I said earlier, bring these sites to the market? And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I guess I would call it a preview. It's all still, of course, our board of directors at Sound Transit has to sign off, but we'll give you a little preview here of the direction we think we're headed. So, just as a sort of high level, I wanted to talk to you about these three high level priorities. I think. You'll see that these are, hopefully these seem a little familiar, that these do build off that engagement work, but also the work we've been doing with staff here. And, right off the bat, I think we have this goal here of maximizing the development capacity of the site. And we want it to be that mixed-use, transit-oriented place, right? So the folks can jump on the train or jump off the train, have something to do. Folks who live there or want to come to visit, right, has that transit-oriented feel to it. They can get around easily and safely on foot. That said, we want to make sure that this development has all the right stuff, I guess, to sort of set up these are the beginning of the new community here, right? This new pattern of development. So by maximize the development capacity, what we really mean is there's a certain amount of development that will be feasible based on what the market can deliver. And we want to make sure we're achieving a good outcome, a good amount of development here on these publicly owned sites, while also making sure that we're not forgetting about things like open space and making a comfortable environment around these. So it's not to say that this will all be buildings, but to say we want to make sure we're really putting these to good use. The second here is that we really think that delivering housing for a range of incomes will be important, and that includes what we call sort of long-term affordable housing. So housing that you might say is, affordable for over 50 years, right? Really long-term commitment to affordable housing. And that's part of, Sound Transit has that as an agency priority, and we have state statute directing us to look for affordable housing outcomes as part of our transit-oriented development program. But it also, I think, is underscored by the community engagement work as well. And the last thing here is this idea of creating community value. And I think here we're trying to pull in this idea of community partnership and trying to think about how we can incentivize the development community to make those partnerships, to make sure that the project actually reflect what the community has said and what the community is interested in. And that, I think our hope is to see, as we'll talk in a minute, to see partnerships there that meaningfully involve nonprofits or community-based organizations in thinking about how these developments might come together.
So your second checkbox, are there examples that you guys have already put some of this in place?
In some way, I would say yes for all of them. And, you know, what I would say is many of our transit-oriented development projects are mixed use. That takes many different forms. So it might be a small amount of ground floor retail on the first floor of a building. But it also, we have an example in Bellevue, which has much more significant amount of commercial space in a mix with housing as well and retail. So we also see, we have projects that are mixed income projects as well. So they're delivering that long-term affordable housing, but also what you might say unrestricted or market rate housing. And the community partnership, and I think this is going to be, it's not a new idea in the region, but the type of partnership we're talking about, I think is a little bit new for Sound Transit in terms of that deep partnership that we're trying to work toward here.
And how many houses are we looking at? Do we know yet? It's too early to say.
I'm sorry?
How many homes are we looking at? Is it too early to say?
I would say it's too early to say at this point. We have looked at what the site we think could accommodate, but it's a pretty big range. So it could be in the order of a few hundred units, potentially. I wouldn't want to say too much more than that, just because I think part of it will depend. We're trying to leave a little bit of flexibility here to see what kind of interesting proposals might come out of the request for proposal process.
Yeah. Madam, you got a question?
Yeah, thank you, Council President. So I'm seeing things like, as I'm listening through, a small amount of retail then compared to Bellevue, which is more retail than it is housing. That concerns me in that our community also deserves a similar balance of things. I think there's been lots of conversation around the housing component, but then I'm wondering where Sound Transit's at on things like job creation and skill building, things, you know, we've had conversations around the food hub and ability for people to, you know, learn new skills to provide for their families, that kind of thing, as opposed to just how many housing units can we put in so then people have to leave the area to go to work and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I'm going to jump to the next slide because I think this will help a little bit to answer your question. So part of what we're thinking here is, so again, these are large sites. We think that there's a variety of things that can be accommodated here. Sound Transit's program, as I've said, and you know, I think, a key outcome for us really is delivering affordable housing. We think that, you know, we've started off the bat to say that these will be mixed use, mixed income sites. So we expect that these will not be fully affordable housing, that there'll be a mix there. And you know, affordable housing, it's, as you may know, is a sort of a regional system to make that work, right, in terms of how to pay for and deliver that. So we expect that, as I say here, when we go out to the market, we'll expect to see affordable housing outcomes as part of each of these blocks. But that we think that there's also room for market rate housing, as well as potentially a more significant commercial component as well. So part of it is we're trying to leave a little bit of flexibility there to see some creativity while setting sort of a minimum expectation to say, we think that this is the, you know, the minimum in terms of particularly affordable housing that we want to see. That still leaves some additional space for other types of uses. Sound Transit doesn't have a broader, I think, I guess I would say our TOD program looks to see looks for a mix of uses, but it doesn't have a broader mandate in terms of some of the other issues you were raising.
So is the idea that this project will be on par with existing developments as far as the housing versus commercial mix? And I understand the range of incomes, and I'm really happy to hear that. I know we've got some exciting community projects that help fit, that are options to help meet all those other goals as far as diversity, mix of uses, some community building services, that kind of thing. But is that minimum requirement going to be percentage-wise the same as other TOD developments?
I would say I don't know that we've yet gotten to a fixed number yet. I think that's part of why we're trying to say, we think that on these two sites that we've got here, we think we could probably fit 2 to 3 buildings, most likely. And I think our initial starting point was to say, we think at least one of those buildings should be affordable housing on each block. So that's sort of the level of detail that we're at there. And I think that beyond that is to say, there's a little bit of room there to think about how that could be done, right? Because I think we also should remember that commercial and housing don't necessarily have to be in conflict. Most ideally, we see those uses stacked, right? So that we see maybe there is a significant commercial use on the ground floor of one of the buildings, and it has housing on top of it, and that's also a great outcome. So I guess the main point I guess I would try to leave you with is I think we're trying to leave in some flexibility there while still sort of meeting the mandate for our programmatic direction and our state statute and that sort. Does that help a little bit?
Go ahead, yeah, you finished, Cody?
It's all good information. I don't know that it gets to my actual question, but it's all helpful. Like I said, I think there's no question that the community, the city, is very supportive of the affordable housing component. I think what we would also like to see is a mix, and I'm curious how that mix and that minimum compares to what has been built in other communities. So there's lots of other questions.
No, that's fine too. And at the same time, is what's going to really determine who have the final outcome. Is it the sound transit people? Is the market going to drive what needed to be in that particular area, or who say so?
It's a little bit it's a little bit all of the above. So again, I think we're trying. So again, as I said, our programs. One of our key outcomes is to get affordable housing delivered for the community and for the region. We know that happens in many different places and in many different real estate markets, and so what can get delivered where it is different. What I think, what I would say is what we've seen so far is that there's a strong market here for housing, not as strong a market for office space, like sort of a standalone office building, but a market for more, not just retail, but uses that would be more oriented to, more of a public use or that sort of thing. So what I think what we're trying to do is say, we want to set this minimum expectation, like I was saying, for the affordable element, and then leave some room in there. And I know that leaves it a little, I know that's a little nebulous, it's a little unclear, but largely what that means, I think, is that will then bring back proposals of a variety of different types, right? I think we'll see some proposers bring in certain types of uses, and we'll see other proposals bring in other types of uses.
Okay. Councilmember Lummer.
Yeah, thank you, Council President. So sort of related to Council President's question, I'm curious, you talk about incentivizing affordable housing, and you have state mandates and organizational mandate, but how do you actually achieve that? What prevents somebody from coming in and saying, we're going to do affordable housing, and then saying, oh, it doesn't pencil, we're going to go market rate for the whole unit? So what assurances do we have that they actually will be building below market rate housing?
So when so let me talk a little bit about this request for proposals process. It's a great question because it's related. So when we go out, right, and you all may be familiar with a request for proposals process, we go out and seek development partners, right? We offer an opportunity out to the market and say, here's the types of things we want to achieve, show us how you can achieve those and your capacity to deliver this project, right? We get proposals back. We then enter a negotiation phase, right? So we go through the evaluation. We select the top performing proposal. We go into negotiation. Sound Transit does not sign away the land just because the moment that we've signed or the moment we start negotiating. We really wait until the very last moment to make sure that their project is delivering on what we've laid out, right? So that when they're getting through that bidding process, right, that's the project that they're proposing, right? We also, as we offer our projects, will typically include something like an affordable housing covenant, on the site to say that that is a requirement of them legally to deliver that project or that element of the project. So we do make sure that those expectations that we set forth in the RFP are carried through until the end.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We can proceed.
Okay. Well, just quickly, I don't have too many, but I have just one more slide after this. Just a couple key points to mention here. We'll go out with this request for proposals. And the key point, I think, really is to note that our plan is, at this point, to offer each of those 2 blocks that you see on the screen independently, rather than putting them out together and say, give us proposals for 4 acres. We're actually planning at this moment to seek proposals for each of those blocks. The idea there being that 4 acres is a lot, and by breaking the sites down into smaller portions, that is a little smaller bite of the apple for a development team to put forth a reasonable proposal. They're still large enough. They're still over 2 acres each. They're still large enough to allow for some creativity in how each of those sites is designed and developed, right? How those buildings get laid out, how many buildings are there, that sort of thing. Where do public spaces go? All of that. Still large enough to allow some flexibility there, but it allows each of those sites to move forward independently, and then if one gets held up for some reason or another, the other one can continue moving, or vice versa. So it gives a little bit more flexibility and still retains some of that creativity, we think.
How many homes can you put on an acre? I don't know. Do you know roughly how many?
How many homes?
Yeah.
Well, it depends how big a building, and it depends. So I think what we're talking about here, right, is apartment buildings, most likely, right? And so it will depend on how big are the units, how many family-sized units are there, how many small units. Again, I think you could theoretically see a couple hundred units on each of those blocks, potentially, depending on how the proposals come in, right? And that's, I should say that's really from more of a physical perspective, rather than, that is not really an opinion about the financing of it, but yeah. So to close this one out, the idea here being that we would expect teams of proposer teams, right? So again, to deliver that mixed use, mixed income project, the idea being there that you see, a nonprofit developer doing the affordable component. You might have a for-profit developer in a team with them doing a market rate component, and that way you're seeing those teams come together. And also, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we want to see that community partnership. I think that's one of the goals there. And so for each of those blocks, we'd expect to see teams proposing their idea for how to meet the goals. So that's the general gist of doing the request for proposals.
Thank you. I think, this is an opportunity here to try to solve some of the need here in Kent, right? I think that's what we all kind of a little passionate and question it, right? So there's a lot of need out there, and this is going to be an opportunity for us to try to solve some of that. So just keep it in mind.
Well, let me talk to my last slide, and then I will be quiet, at least for the moment. Just to quickly touch on next steps. We're working over the course of the summer to sort of finalize our plan for this. We'll talk to our board of directors at the end of the summer. It's the current plan. It says virtual forum. We actually had a developer and community-based organization forum last month, and the intent there was to sort of preview the idea, here's what we're thinking about. We've got these 2 sites. And to facilitate some connections and introductions between development community people and folks in the nonprofit and community-based organization world. So we did that already. We're excited to do it. I think we got some good response about getting those connections there. But that was all part of this process here through the summer to kind of land this a bit more. Assuming that goes well with our board, we'll then start working in the fall on getting an RFP out. I think right now we're penciled in, hopefully for October, to release an RFP. we'd leave that open for a few months to leave some time for proposals to kind of come together. Because that, once the RFP goes out, then they can really see, proposer teams can really see what are the actual things we're requiring. So that gives them a few months to put those together. And then as we get into the new year, we'll start to review and evaluate the proposals, and then there'll be a whole other set of work after that. But those are the relatively near-term next steps. So with that, I thank you, and of course, if you have more questions, we're happy to try to answer them.
You have a question you like still?
Oh, I'm sorry, no, my light was still on, but I do have another question.
Go ahead.
Can we expect that in January or at some point shortly thereafter, you'd be coming back and letting us know the results of the selection?
That is a great question. I don't know. Yes, I would imagine we could come back with an update. I don't know if it'll be in January at that point. Part of it will just depend. I think we can work with staff to make sure you're up to date on what the timing of the RFP is and when the right appropriate time. When we do our procurement processes, doing our RFPs, we, everyone inside that process, right, has to maintain confidentiality. And so until we kind of clear through that, we can't talk about it outside of that realm. So once we get through that, then that's the time when we can start to talk more broadly about it.
Great, thank you.
I think it'd be great to bring it back, so thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, this is your guys' presentation? Okay, team, any questions, thoughts, concern? Thank you for your time. We appreciate everything's going on, and really looking forward to this project. Like I said, we only get so many opportunity to kind of capture some of the need that's going on in the city, so we thank you and your team. Okay? Bill, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, we are going, I think that's it, right?
Yeah, no, unless you have any questions for me.
No. Just, yeah. Okay. We believe in you, Bill, okay? All right, guys, we're going to take a break until 7. Thank you so much.